Sounds great.
Yeah, thanks again for having me. Let me just get my presentation on the screen and make sure everyone can see it. Obviously, I'm not going to ask if people can see it. I know you can. We're past the era of can you hear me and can you see the presentation, I suppose. But yes, so let's start with a couple of logistical bits from my side as well. So a few things I wanted to say are, I'll go through who I am, why I've arrived at this topic and so on in a minute. But before then, it's slightly longer than I'd like it to be, and it has a lot of words on it. That's slightly by design. There's a lot to cover here. These are topics that are ridiculously complex, unfortunately. And I know that everyone here has heard about them before. So bear with them. There'll be loads of words and words you've seen before. But outside of that, so really quickly, my name is Duena Blomstrom. You can find me on LinkedIn. I write a bit. There's 2 LinkedIn newsletters. You can subscribe to. One of them is called Chasing Psychological Safety, and it's designed for the kind of organizational /HR/ businessy side of things. And the other one is called The Future is Agile and is designed for us. And the 2 of them are both trying to tackle the same topics, and I'll explain what the connection is in a second. So in short, I've written a couple of books as well, but in short, the connection is while writing the second book called People Before Tech, it occurred to me that these 2 communities are separate. And so that the communication between them is one of the big problems we are facing. So essentially, the fact that there's a community that's looking at the people over here, and then that there's a technology conversation in the DevOps and the Agile community in the other side is, I believe, part of the problem. And so I've written this second book so that we try and bridge that. Obviously, having 2 different newsletters doesn't necessarily accomplish that, but I do make as many connections between them as humanly possible. And on one of these newsletters, if you guys have seen it the other week, I have just published the fact that I am crazy enough to have gotten a tattoo that reminds me of how we have to stay agile. But I have done this for the last, 20 years. My first Trello board is now 12 years old. And yeah, I suspect that it's never going to change. I do believe I have understood the idea of internalizing a mindset change to the point that it's now at the bone level. And I think anyone that's been seeing your talks before, from what I've seen, is probably at the same level. There are some amazing pieces of content I have seen in the club before. So in terms of the book that I was talking about and how I've arrived at this topic in general, it's called The Importance of Psychological Safety and Teamwork in the Digital Age. But what it deals with really is the fact that we have this human debt that we're going to be talking about today. And it does talk about the fact that there's this divide between the 2 communities that I was slightly mentioning earlier, and I will come back to in a little bit. But what it attempts to do is make sure everyone's on the same page, because in my view, as long as we are going to have this kind of gap between HR and tech, between DevOps and management, between business and technology, we're always going to be dealing with these issues. And the more time that passes, the more of this human debt that we're going to be talking about do we accrue. And everyone here, I'm sure, is familiar with the idea of tech debt. This is a very different type of debt, but I'm presuming it's a lot more devious and a lot more problematic in the long run. So back in the day, I used to spend a lot of time explaining to bankers and bigger organizations, in particular in the financial sector, why we need Agile. So I spent years and years explaining why we need it, and then kind of what does it really mean if you're going to truly change mentalities towards comprehending Agile at that same tattoo level. And in those conversations, it became very clear that it's not necessarily a question of them not understanding. It's a question of them not being able to translate that understanding into day-to-day because of organizational issues. So while talking to them, while writing the books, is when I've arrived at the idea that we can find out what it is, we can attempt to put it in place, we can try these transformations, we can call ourselves Agile, but we'll never really get to a place where we can truly embrace it and feel it in our bones until we have made changes in the way we feel, we think, and we see our workplace. And so a lot of the things I've heard over the years were, well, if we really want to get agile, and obviously we should do that because agility is necessary from the point of view of if we want to achieve anything in terms of technology, this is the way to do it. But the conversations that I was seeing with bankers were around, how do we do that? What do we need to buy? Do we need to buy more tools? Do we need to get a bigger data center? This, by the way, is a real data center from Google. I don't know if you guys have seen this image before. There's a bunch of them. They're lovely. Or is it just a question of being really religious about process? We've all seen hundreds of places where Scrum is more of a religion than it is an understanding of how to do things. Or is it just a question of buying more Post-its? What is it? And we'll throw enough money at it so that we make these changes. And so after many of these enterprises have done all of these changes, they've realized that despite all the money, all the tools, all the data centers, they weren't getting very far. And there's numerous examples of agile transformations that weren't quite going as expected. There's numerous examples of people and companies that hadn't quite gotten to the levels that they were trying to get to in terms of success. And so the question had become, finally, why is it that it's not moving? And evidently we know this here. The reason for that is that we didn't really start where we should have done, which is it's not about the tools, the data centers, or the money. It's about the people, and it is about the humans that we need to kind of get in shape to start making those changes in their mindset, and more importantly, have the type of functional teams and the type of functional team dynamics that is going to help them be agile, which now connects us finally with the title of my book. I'll get to that in a second again. So again, finally got to the point where we all agreed that despite throwing money at it and doing all these things, we're never going to get to a truly agile and functional place until we have changed the human aspect of things. So if you look at agile transformations that have went well, you'll see that they almost all of them have in common a couple of things. And in my book, I have tried to look at maybe an example or 10, and they all seem to kind of come back to this bit. And again, these are, you might call them differently, but you'll recognize them and you're going to be able to see these bits and pieces in almost all enterprises that have done well so far. Let's hope they keep doing well. So they all seem to all have something I call organizational permission, which is this deep commitment to change. Obviously, there's servant leadership, something I'm going to speak about quite a bunch today because it is incredibly pivotal to the conversation we're having on teams. They are taking Agile to heart, truly, that they're really trying to understand that being flexible, being adaptable is not a thing you can do with Post-its, but a thing you have to feel. They have obviously an obsession with the customer, which is the whole point of Agile, isn't it? And then an obsession with the team, which is, I think, really interesting. The organizations that are doing well are always talking about teams in a much larger proportion than organizations that aren't. So it's almost symptomatic these days, and after a good 3 years of doing nothing but speaking about HumanDebt, I'm now starting to see patterns where organizations that aren't doing well are the ones that have essentially dropped the idea of team, and they're not very clear on what the team is, and the teams themselves are not clear that they exist. So the less focus there is on teams, the less successful that organization, the more of this HumanDebt that I've been seeing. Whereas the ones that are doing well, the good examples, they are undoubtedly obsessed with the idea of team. And so the other things obviously are continuous everything, not only development, but learning and improvement, and then refining results to what matters. You know, I'm not going to keep you through all of these. You're going to be able to see the slides yourself. But essentially, it's just a question of making sure that when you redefine what your outcomes are, then you put people in the middle of the equation. And then they have a culture of experimentation, which obviously just means that it's the center of the entire topic of Agile to a degree. And they are really smart at empowering their teams, truly empowering them, not just saying so. There's a lot of rhetorics around it. Whether or not that translates into practice is different for everyone. And most importantly, whether they call it this or not, and most of them don't, they obsess with lowering the human debt, which means to them, to most of these successful ones, that they have found ways in which they put their humans, their employees, their developers, whatever it is that they're doing, at the center of every thought they have and every process they have. So anything they want to do starts with, where is the team? Where are the humans in this? And how are they going to have the dynamic that's going to propel them further? And what does this mean in itself? What is this term, this human debt term that I have come up with a while ago? Essentially, it's the equivalent of technical debt, but for people is what I would say. We all know what technical debt is. All of those times we've cut corners, we haven't really tested code, or we kind of threw things out without paying attention to the PRs. I'm not a developer. I never really know what I'm talking about when I talk about tickets when it comes to development. But that said, I've seen multiple situations in which people have cut corners in terms of technical delivery, and that's how we end up with having that. It is almost the exact same thing on the people level, because all of the times that the enterprise has started things and never really finished them, so all of the initiatives, the projects, intentions that the organizations had to do better by their employees, but abandoned halfway, and all of the missed opportunities to make their lives and their work easier and more joyful in general, all of the empty talk on equality, respect, lack of blame, courage, and trust, and I'm sure all of us here have heard a lot of that empty talk over the years. All of the missing focus on teams that I was talking about earlier, all of the lack of preoccupation and resources for building better team dynamics, of which that's a very widespread of symptoms that people have, all of the condoned command and control and lack of empowerment. Again, we're going to get back to those in a minute. And all of the times when happiness and well-being, mindset change, and emotions were seen as fluffy. Really, all of the times that they had to use these air quotes around those words are really the times that we're talking about. And to another degree and to a bigger degree, and I'm sure some people from that side of the camp are maybe one day going to see this, and ideally they won't take it the wrong way. We need to be real here and admit that a lot of our HR departments are just admin these days, and that contributes to the big mass of human debt we have created. So all of this creates a toxic culture, and that is human debt, right? In the same way that we seem to be creating technical debt as well. So who has human debt? Where is it, right? I think everyone does. And it's very easy to start acquiring it even at startup size. And obviously, it doesn't really matter what industry you're in. It's very visible in the technical industry and in the knowledge industry, but it does exist everywhere. Over the last 3 years, we've worked with absolutely every industry, and I can assure you there isn't one that doesn't have any. Even the big guys in Silicon Valley, a lot of the time have amassed a lot more human debt than they can imagine. I have no idea how much technical debt they have. So where you'll find it more often than not is obviously waterfall shops. So people who haven't even attempted Agile, so they don't even know they have this human debt, just as much as they don't know they need to move fast in terms of technology. Obviously, places that are really heavy on command and control, places that have low psychological safety, and this is key, and we'll talk about it in a second. Organizations that have kind of a widespread blame culture, whether they can tell they do or not. Organizations where they have fear, they have dread, and those things have become essentially the norm, and they are institutionalized, and where it's mocked if you do any of the people work. And then where employees are expected to be professional and devoid of emotions. And more importantly, you do, all of us, anyone listening to this, and even, kind of startups that are all about humans, even ours, we can, if we're not careful, amass human debt all the time. So there's two kinds of human debt, if you wish. There's human debt at organizational level, and then there's human debt at team level. And it's very easy to not see both sides of the coin. I myself started by thinking human debt is at the organizational level only. That was wrong. It's really built at every level of an organization. So in terms of the big level, right, the organizational part, it's people work projects that started and were abandoned. It's lip service from the top, of which there's a lot. There's management changes, there's bad leadership, there's Friday initiatives, again with the air quotes, again with the fluffy bits, things that have been started, but more as an afterthought, more as an kind of thing they're doing because they have nothing else left to do, or because someone's organizing some initiatives with the remaining budget for the year. It never really from a place where true belief is being put into those actions. Big topics that are left unclear, right? All the D&I things that we have kind of touched on, but never really sorted. All the employee happiness, which we kind of still take with a grain of salt, and for good reasons, for good, deep reasons. We haven't gotten very far on those topics. The ways of work conversations that we see this unfolding right now. In fact, because of the situation we're in, there's going to be a lot more human debt that's going to be amassed because of the way that some of these companies are approaching the move towards remote and hybrid. There are also things like sterile surveys. We've all worked in organizations where you're going to have a couple of questions in a corner that you send into the abyss and you never hear again. And that's in the good sense. In really bad situations, you might hear back and it might be negative. So they might transform into punishment and punitive acts of sorts if indeed you get any feedback back from the way you've responded to employee surveys and NPS scores and so on. And all of these places seem to have a generalized culture of fear. They are essentially avoiding failure at all costs, obviously. They are allowing toxic politics. They're staying silent when there's systemic racism or bullying, when they see systemic problems that they do not touch. That obviously contributes to a very toxic culture. They condone command and control. You're going to keep hearing this. I have quite the obsession with it. I think the more we accuse it and the more we bring it forward, the more likely it is we're going to do something about it. And this is becoming really urgent, in particular, again, with this move to hybrid. The lip service to Agile, right? That's kind of why we're all here. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of so-called Agile transformations that have kind of all the makings of a disaster. And if you start digging, you're going to see, boards and board members that don't quite even understand what that's about. You're going to start seeing leadership that doesn't even really know what a board looks like. They don't have a Jira account, they don't have a Trello account, they've never spoken to anyone that had to plan a sprint, but they think they're doing an Agile transformation. I could go on and on. And then overall unhappy and unengaged employees. All of those things happen at an organization level. These are not things that have kind of started from the team level, and they cannot necessarily be helped at the team level. But there is a level in which we create this type of human debt at the team level as well. And that's the bit that we can and should be working on. And these are those ones that you're looking at now. So impression management, which is something that Mindy mentioned earlier, and it's a really big topic. I'll get into it in a second, but it happens, and it is let's just put it in short and give you a really quick definition. It is the opposite of psychological safety, if you wish, the dark side of psychological safety. It's when we are at the team level in a bubble, afraid to speak up because we would be looking a certain negative way to our colleagues. Those we're afraid of looking ignorant, we're afraid of looking negative, we're afraid of looking, essentially anytime that we are fearing a loss of status, then we are impression managing and we are attempting to show ourselves in a better light. Those times are obviously really detrimental to the team, and we are amassing human debt. All the times that we feel tension in the team, but we don't speak up about it, we don't talk about it, we hope it will resolve itself. It doesn't. Or it might resolve itself, but it will still leave enough of a mark on the team's overall health and well-being. When we witness someone that's being treated unfairly, but we don't say anything about it, either to them or to the team leader or to the team in itself, So when we feel we are brushing big topics under the carpet, like I was mentioning earlier, D&I, all the big race conversations, all the big conversations around employee happiness and so on, those are big pieces, and we're not discussing them, in particular not at the team level. I'll tell you in a second why not. And when we should be and we don't, we create more human debt, as we do when we know we should have done things that we haven't, like a team relaunch or a team building exercise, but we canceled it. We didn't have time, right? We're too busy. We're too full of day-to-day tasks. We're operationally heavy. So we tend to cancel. If we do, we amass human debt. When we have failures and mistakes, which we've not learned from, we haven't discussed, we haven't really used to our advantage, that is contributing to it. Anytime that we deprioritize the human work in favor of delivery, and this is kind of the crux of what we're talking about today, we all work in environments where we are asked to do, or where we have to do, not asked necessarily, where we have to do an extreme number of things, right? We all juggle hundreds of tasks and tickets and needs and feel like we're always racing against the clock. Everyone's overworked, people are burnt out. That happens at the team level as well. And when it does, obviously we're really focused on getting through the day, getting through the tickets, and just moving along and making sure that as much as possible has been moved to the done column. That said, while there's a lot of delivery work, there's a lot of operational work that needs to happen, we cannot and should not leave the human work aside, because it will always come to bite us. This is the crux of what we're talking about today. So other examples are when we've avoided one-on-ones that we should have done, we've avoided conversations between ourselves we should have done, when we haven't invested in an emotional bond with our teammates, or when we have no idea about how to become better in terms of understanding our emotions, and we don't train our EQ. We have to remember that, so EQ stands for emotional quotient, I'm sure everyone here knows, but we come to the workplace, all of us professionals, with no knowledge of how to understand emotions, whether they are of our own or of our colleagues. We have no formal training in this, right? No one comes out of school with extreme knowledge of both Java and how to read the emotions of their colleagues, right? Most people are completely oblivious as to how they are feeling and how others are feeling. And most importantly, we go to workplaces where we have been told that's not necessary, that no one pays you to have the skill of understanding how you feel and how others feel, because you're in a workplace. You're not expected to feel, you're expected to work, you're expected to deliver theoretical skills, you're expected to deliver expertise that's hands-on. You're never really expected to have read the emotions of others. That's obviously not working for us, and it's not going to work going forward, because we do work in these situations now where understanding how others feel, it is absolutely the difference between making things work and failing. So it is now the time that soft skills, or EQ, and the ability to understand how we feel and others feel so that we can actually work together better, is more important than ever. And ideally, people would get proper training. And if there is no training, that kind of contributes to the human debt. When we have no interest in having a healthy and happy team with no human work invested in it, like I said earlier, and then again, not treating the human work as delivery ops, dev work important. And most importantly, and almost not most importantly, but most interestingly, is when we're blaming the organization. This actually contributes to human debt. So when we say we're fine at our team level, but this place we work in, they don't really care about us. They don't give us the things we need. They don't, and it's all true, right? All of these things are happening. We do work in these places where the organization is to blame, but that doesn't mean we should use that as an excuse and not work on these topics on top that we could and should be working on. So what can we do to start reducing this human debt? Ideally, we get some organizational permission, at least a minimal amount where talking about these topics is no longer scoffed at, or eyes are being rolled, or people are telling anyone to kind of get back to work and not talk about these feeling things and these team dynamic things that are just silly and for Friday. So some level of organizational permission is absolutely necessary. Otherwise, we're never going to start on this human work. To then start on the actual human work, we have to focus on data and actions. I'm really militant about this, having a chat about these topics, which are indeed very esoterical as they are, with no real life follow-up and no action that you're taking from there, no tickets, no to-dos, no attempts at an exercise, no workshops, no nothing, is a good starting point, but long-term a bankrupt strategy. So when you're in a place where there might be chatter about the idea of how important it is to have tight teams, how important it is to have the right dynamic, how important psychological safety is, but the conversation stops at a theoretical side. And when that conversation is essentially just another TED talk or another afternoon with some consultancy that just comes in and does what I'm doing now, tells people how important it is, and then goes home and nothing happens. So leaves that team with no ability to collect data and transform it into actions to change their behavior. If there's none of the data and actions that change behavior, then we're not reducing human debt. We're only talking about things. And look, talking about things is better than nothing. We need an awareness phase, but we got to get past that so that we start seeing the needle moving. And I think this is a controversial one. I realized ages later it is. When I wrote this, that we should treat human debt as tech debt, I was coming from a very privileged kind of background. I didn't realize this at the time, but it absolutely is, in the sense that I had thought that everyone is well and acutely aware of their tech debt and they are desperately working to lower it, right? Not necessarily the case. I now know, and I put my hands up that I was wrong. Not everyone cares what their tech debt is or works on it. So the places that do, then they should absolutely, and it is elevated to an emergency because they know that otherwise they would be failing, then they should kind of use that model and be right, what do we have tech debt-wise, what do we have human debt-wise? The places that don't, obviously don't have that ability. And then lastly, focus on psychological safety, which brings me to, we live and breathe psychological safety at People Not Tech. And we believe that psychological safety is the only way to create high-performing teams, and having healthy, happy, high-performing teams is the only way to have Agile, really. So what is psychological safety? I'm sure most of you have seen these definitions before. Essentially, in short, it's a shared belief that the team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. So people in the team feel like they are safe to speak up, in short, right? We have a longer definition we've went through. I'm not going to take you through it. I'm just trying to give you an overall idea of what it is. So essentially, teams that are tight and are having this dynamic where they are completely open with each other, completely trusting, although trust is not equivalent, and completely tight and emotionally bonded, are teams that are successful. But this is not a concept that it's very new. It's been studied for tens of years by the world of academia. The most notable professor that's speaking about this, I'm sure you guys are very well aware who Amy Edmondson is, but if anyone that's listening hasn't looked into her work, please do so. She's written a couple of books that are absolutely mandatory reading, and she is the foremost authority in the topic of psychological safety. And what she has found in various industries, in particular in kind of the aeronautical industry and the medical industry, is that companies that have ignored the topic of psychological safety have sometimes met their death, really. I mean, if you look at Boeing, if you look at Kodak, if you look at multiple examples of places where they have ignored psychological safety, that has not panned out well for them. So she has these examples in her books, as I'm sure you're aware. And then this became a topic that we're discussing today, and the topic that's important to the technology/knowledge industry when Google stumbled upon it. Again, something that I'm sure everyone is aware of. Google had this really, really large scale study. I won't go into huge details, but it is the biggest study of its kind when it comes to the workplace. And what they asked was, what makes a perfect team? What makes our team truly high performing as compared to other teams, and what is it that makes them, Google level teams? And what they found consistently over an extremely big set of data is that the number one thing that these teams had in common is that they felt psychologically safe. There's a number of other factors that are incredibly important from the point of view of agile transformations, but I'm not going to go into them right now because we don't have the time. So once Google has landed on it, it's kind of when the community has seen it and has started to kind of replicate these things, right? I'm sure many of you have read the State of DevOps reports. The accelerated reports are astounding always, but this one from 2019, I think, is the first one that was starting every slide with the fact that if you want anything, if you want less technical debt, if you want productivity, if you want better code, you have to start with a culture of psychological safety. And it wasn't until they put it that way that it became clear that psychological safety is not a nice to have. It's not about being nice. It's not about feeling safe in your job. It's a team dynamic that enables people to have high performance. And then once they brought attention to it, it's when kind of all these studies started coming up of the woodworks. They had existed all along, but they weren't as clear to people. When you have psychological safety, there's very clear numbers that can be seen. And when you put these numbers together, you can actually build the type of business case that you can take to the organization and shake them into giving you that organizational permission, because psychological safety will reduce your turnover. And that is what I call in times of peace, meaning if you look at the world today and what's happening with the Great Resignation, I'm presuming that that number is a lot higher. So in other words, if you had a 30% reduction in turnover before time, now that you are faced with COVID and the Great Resignation, the teams that are psychologically safe are probably 60–70% less likely to dismantle, and people are less likely to leave if they have this. It increases productivity by at least 20%, although I've heard anecdotally that Google believes it's 40% internally. It does reduce safety incidents by 40%. That's very clearly documented by multiple studies. You've seen the project Aristotle bit. And then in the accelerated report, this is how many companies they've polled to replicate the Google finding. So there's clear numbers that one can build a business case on to show that psychological safety at the team level is really important. And obviously now there are tools like ours. I don't know of many like ours, but at least ours that I know intimately, where there's a serious attempt to actually bring that data into action for teams to change their behavior themselves. Which brings me to the fact that this is something that can be like looking at psychological safety, comprehending it, and then attempting to translate it into action. Is something you can do pen and paper as well. You can do by hand, is what we call it. So in the absence of any tools, in the absence of any coaching, you could potentially do it at an organization, at a team level, not at an organizational level. That said, you'd have to find a way to keep in mind all of these elements, because they are part of what makes a psychologically safe team. So is the team flexible? Are they engaged? Are they emotionally bonded with each other? Are they speaking up always? Meaning, are they avoiding impression management? Are they courageous, resilient, and always learning? And if you can find a way to keep these in mind and pull them continuously and then correct those behaviors, you're golden. That's all you need to do. So essentially, whether you use a tool like ours or you do it on your own, what is essential is that you close the feedback loop so that you see continuous improvement in these behaviors. Meaning, if people told you something and they gave you the data, and now you're starting to see how exactly these behaviors are panning out in the team. You're starting to see when they are holding back, you're starting to see when they are not courageous, then it's imperative that you also do something about it. So even if you do it on your own without the help of any kind of software like ours, make sure that there's an actual closing of the feedback loop. So again, what are these behaviors that you need to keep an eye on? You have to make sure that people are speaking up, right? That they are giving input, and that they are always giving input. There's no instance in which they aren't courageously open. If they're voicing concerns, if they have fears, if they see mistakes, if they're offering opinions, they're offering ideas, obviously try and make sure that they keep being vulnerable. It's a very uncomfortable thing, and it's a difficult thing, and it's an esoteric thing, but there are exercises to help people get to that place where they feel that they can open up and they can risk that they are as open-hearted as others, and that most importantly, they stay feeling emotionally connected with each other, which is an extremely simple thing to do that seems to escape most teams. And then impression management that we've talked about before is the fear of the action of not speaking up for fear of appearing one of these things. Either we're afraid of looking like we don't know something, like we can't do something, like we're being a negative Nelly, or we're being disruptive or intrusive. Anytime we stop ourselves or bite our lip and we don't say something, that's when we engage in impression management. And when it happens, it lowers the good behaviors, and you get a lower psychological safety kind of overall situation in total. So these are examples of impression management. I'm going to go quick through them because, kind of these are screenshots of our software. It's a lot of them are public in our articles about impression management. But the point I'm making is when you start dissecting these behaviors and seeing them as singular behaviors, then you can start working on them, and you can start working on them at your own team level. And that is what the single most important thing you can do, so that you start lowering your human debt at your team level. So towards the title of this conversation, is it more dangerous than technical debt? I absolutely believe it is. You can have technical debt up to a point. I'm not sure exactly how much of it you can have until things start breaking horribly, but you can absolutely not fix it, and you can absolutely not have less of it if you don't work on the human debt that you keep acquiring. So if you don't keep an eager eye on the human debt all the time. Again, I'm going to go through these things really quickly because there's no point in spending time if you guys are going to read them afterwards. I do believe you're going to have the slides. But the big highlights here are you'll feel when you're lowering your human debt. You'll feel it. It's going to be quite clear because all of those tenets of agility are going to start feeling easier and feeling like you're getting to a place where they're not that difficult to do, just because you've had this team dynamic where you could show up as your own true self that's open and willing to speak up. So obviously we all can and should be doing something. When it comes to doing something at the team level, like I said, there are practical things we can and should be doing. Keep an eye on those things, start doing those actions, start doing those actual team actions, and you're going to start seeing results. When it comes to the organizational level, obviously it's less clear that we can do something, but we still can affect change. At the team level, again, make it a priority, make the human work, the looking at those things a priority, get it on the sprint, get it in tickets. Make sure you have the time and the resources. Literally plan that you take the time to do the human work. This is probably the biggest and hardest step, but it's a necessary one. If you're a team leader of any kind, coach people over the team level resistance, it's what we call it. You have most likely a number of people in the team that have shown up with good true intentions to begin with, and then they have been institutionalized and clubbed over the head numerous times whenever they have attempted to be their true self. So they won't believe that it's the time where you want them to be open, you want them to be unprofessional and tell you their feelings. They will have trouble understanding that this is now a time where you're serious about this human work. So you're going to have to take the time to coach them over this team level resistance, which can last months of sustained work, if not longer. To do that, rewarding and praising people for this hard people work is really important, and kind of doing so with enough empathy is important, because we all feel that it's hard, right? No one finds that people work horribly easy. I don't think anyone does, not even psychologists do. It's tough, it's hard, it's uncomfortable, but it's the most valuable thing people can do. And obviously doing this hard work and understanding that it's hard and finding ways to praise at least people, if not reward them for it, is extremely important. Whenever we hear ourselves or others do that BS/PR only rhetorics, it's a time to call it out. And I think it's really important we keep each other accountable that way. Keep measuring. Whether you have software like ours or you measure through kind of indicators that you've agreed on at the team level, it doesn't really matter as long as you keep believing that you need to measure. Obviously, an organizational level survey on the engagement of your team is absolutely worthless when it comes to this, because what you're trying to measure for is what is the behavior that my team is experiencing. What do we have as a dynamic? How do we behave? That's what you're measuring. You cannot do that with anything else but an understanding of what are the bits and pieces of behavior at your team level. Like I said, easier to do with software, but you can attempt to do it by hand as well. This impression management is a really good example. Once you understand impression management, and it's very easy to do, people connect with it and they can start catching themselves when they engage in this behavior, right? Anytime that they stop themselves from speaking up, they'll notice it. They might not say it, they might not necessarily act on it, but they'll start noticing they're doing it. And when they start noticing it, that's when they can kind of quench that behavior because they have the trigger. It's the basics of cognitive behavioral therapy, if you wish. Literally understand that you're doing it, see that trigger, and that behavior will start diminishing. And then doing it first, putting the people work at the beginning of your meeting, at the beginning of your retro, at the start of your conversations is the only way to do it. We've learned that the hard way. We obviously eat our own dog food, we use our own software at People Not Tech. Any time that we start retro with the actual operational side of the retro, if you wish, and we don't do any people action that's derived from our dashboard, that's a surefire time that we will not be doing our actual people to do, our ticket that has to do with the people work. So put it first. At an organizational level, obviously it would be amazing and grandiose if anyone would be willing to do an honest human debt audit and look at all these topics that they've left unsolved. It's really important and magical it would be if people were able to check for psychological safety at the top. What this means is, I'm sure we've all seen this, right? There's boards, there's leadership teams that are, I should not use the word team because they aren't a team. They are a work group at best, and most likely just kind of a newsletter type environment where they come in, they talk at each other, they posture, it's an impression management festival, and then everyone goes home, and there's never a time when that team truly tries to hear each other. No one stands up, no one has the courage to say, blimey, we got to do something about our people. We cannot just continuously wait to see what happens if we mistreat them. And so no one speaks up, no one points out when that needs to happen. And that's not enough. And that's because there's not enough psychological safety at that top. And then really important bit for an organization, and this is something we can help the organization with, show the effects of the human work in actual results that they understand, right? So all these organizations have spent 50, 60 years believing that the only way that you can show performance is by looking at either proper like results, old school, or the newfangled KPIs and OKRs. And realistically, that's fine. And thankfully, the human work can immediately reflect in those. So as soon as you start doing some human work, those KPIs, OKRs, results are going to increase. But only if you make that connection visible do you get the gain of it. This is a controversial one, and I'm aware of that, but it's time we talked about it very honestly. We, DevOps, we Agile, we tech, have to coach HR to regain their role. Their initial role was to help us make sure people are happy, right? Not hire them, not fire them in a safe way, but once we'll have them, that they are productive and happy and performant and all the good things, right? They've lost that. And they don't actually realistically know how to do that at this point. We are at a point in our kind of development in terms of learning how to do Agile, where DevOps knows a lot more about what makes people tick, how developers feel, what makes them reluctant, how they engage in the new processes with the air quotes de rigueur. But DevOps knows about people. HR knows less about people in an Agile environment, without a doubt. That's clear. That's not controversial. What is controversial is either DevOps and Agile find ways to coach HR and come together and give them the information they've acquired from running people in Agile teams, or they need to do away with the department. We cannot be talking about business partners that are HR and then equally never ever have them help us in terms of our team dynamics and people work. One of the big things that I think needs happening, and whether it's HR or or tech, it doesn't really matter, but we have to make this big leap, like I said earlier, from command and control to servant leadership, because in the absence of that, we won't have a hybrid that works. We won't have empowered teams. If we don't have empowered teams, we will essentially not be able to do this work. Because what I'm proposing here, I don't know if we've noticed, is that we take this immense task of fixing the human debt, and then we distribute it to a team level and have those teams be able to show up and fix themselves. Because waiting for the organization to do it is not going to work. And obviously, remunerate and recognize the people work would be amazing. I'll leave you with a couple of things, and then maybe we can have a proper chat. As I said, treat it as tech debt if tech debt is important. Get this organizational permission, because it's imperative that you have some of it, at least to start. Make sure that there's some, or not make sure, figure out if there's any psychological safety or any team at the top at all. And if not, that's something to work on. Advocate for continuous improvement and this people work. It's a hard thing to advocate for. It's a really big job, but I just need everyone listening to this to do even more about it. I know everyone listening has been reading about it, trying, putting their own skin on the line any number of times, pushed when they would have rather shut up, put themselves into risky situations just to kind of advocate for the people work. We have to keep doing that until it's become part of our day-to-day, and until such time that people are doing it essentially all the time. As I said, use servant leadership to empower and enable teams so that they can reduce human debt themselves. We're distributing the work of fixing teams and making this psychological safety key dynamic happen at the team level if we empower them and we help them do it. Consistently call out objections and BS. Anytime people tell you we're too busy, that's an excuse. Anytime people tell you there's just no time to do the people work, that's an excuse. Call it out every time. Find ways that you can keep people honest and able to tell you when that's just an objection, that's not the actual truth, and kind of dig deeper, because you're going to always find the reasons why people are afraid of that work, right? And eventually are going to be able to move past it. As I said many times, I keep talking about this. Everyone that's listening to this is a superhero. There's a lot of work that goes into this. There's a lot of fight that goes into this. I appreciate tremendously the amounts of, I've seen people brought to the brink of tears wanting to do better by their teams. And those superheroes are just inexplicably awesome, but they have it hard. So it's good to be reverent towards them. Again, obsessed with psychological safety, I would say that. Ensure it's measured and increased. Read the book if you wish. Find software, either ours, ideally ours, come talk to us about the demo, but if not, I'm sure that you can do it yourself, pen and paper. Just keep measuring, keep focused on the data, keep focused on your team, keep focused on their behaviors, and then eventually you're going to get to a place where it becomes much easier. Right, that was it. So let's just see what questions we had, right, Wendy?
Yes, of course. The first question I am going to say is someone is asking if you can share the slides.
Sure.
If you don't mind, you can just go ahead and email them to me, and I will actually drop my email in, so anybody who wants them can just go ahead and email me, and I will email them to everybody else.
Yeah.
And then there is another question in here. Sorry, I wanted to get that one was personally sent to me, so I wanted to make sure that one got asked first, because it's not one we can actually see.
If you're sure it was public.
It was sent to me privately, so I want to make sure. We did get the LinkedIn live going, so that's good. Took a little bit. We do have a question. What about the colleagues that are actively working against team building? Right.
Thanks, Pamela. I mean, that is what I meant when I said there's team level resistance to the human work, and it's completely justifiable. We've all spent tens of years being told we are not being paid to feel or be human. We are paid to do this work, type these things, and go home. So the resistance comes from, we've told people that for 30, 40 years. It is hard work. They have every reason to not want to be doing the team building work. The only kind of answer I have to it is find a way to connect the data in front of their very eyes, and then pull them and push them and drag them and dig deep to find out why each of them individually are afraid of the work. Do those conversations, open the floor for data being translated into action. Let them see some feedback that means something, that translates into changes of behavior, and then look at that data again. Because the most magical thing we can do for humans so that they eventually do the human work is to show them how their actions change their behaviors, and then connect that to outcomes. And then eventually we have seen the thing that I'm most grateful for over the last 2.5, 3 years that we've been doing this with tens, hundreds of teams, is the fact that we have literally seen people in tears seeing what difference it makes to their lives to change their own behaviors and actually become more performant through something they've done themselves. They haven't had to call HR. They haven't had to wait for the organization to come do anything. They've been able to make these changes themselves. And that's golden. That makes people keep to it. They will eventually stop resisting it.
Great. Is there any other questions?
Well, obviously, as I said, the slides are very full. Kind of read them at your own pace, since Mind is going to make sure that you have them. And
We do have one question. We do have one on our LinkedIn Live. Question: how do you measure psychological safety?
I cannot give you a theoretical answer without essentially, I hate self-promotion in this topic because it's really big and important, and I wish people could be doing it on their own in other ways. But what we do is we've spent, gosh, the better part of 3 years researching how to do that. And the way to do it, as some of the bits and pieces that you saw in the presentation are screenshots from our software. We make a piece of software that measures it in the sense that it asks, there's no other way. It asks people, it measures behavior, and then it shows that data to the team and asks the team to do something about it. You measure it by looking at these components. There are different behaviors that can be assessed by looking at what people told you, by looking at how they react, by taking some of these indicators, putting them together, ideally with an algorithm, but even without it, as I said, have a piece of software if you can, ours ideally. If not, do it yourself. Look at those behaviors. Are people flexible? Are people learning? Are they emotionally connected? You can measure this and you can start understanding the components of it on your own, even in the absence of software. But if you wanted to make it easier for yourself and have an actual work tool, come talk to us and get a demo.